All right, greetings, cardboard fans. Welcome back to Hot Cardboard. Today, I want to talk about junk wax era sealed sports cards and the occasional non-sports cards. For some number of years, I have been a real believer in sealed junk wax era stuff. This is stuff from kind of the mid 80s to early 90s. With an emphasis on the 80s, certainly. And the further back you go, there's just more quality and more, I think, opportunity for appreciation in the kinds of sets that we're talking about. But in front of us, we see a collection of cases from said period, junk wax era. Looks like we've got a 1991 Topps wax box case baseball. Over in the corner, we got an 86 Topps wax box baseball. We got 87 Topps, 88 Topps, 86 Donruss. This is probably, we got some Pro Set football cards. We've got 89 Bowman baseball inaugural set. In here is probably another 86 Topps or something like that. And then if I can take you on a little bit of a walk here, I'm gonna have to turn my dehumidifier off here. But over here we have probably my larger collection of junk wax era stuff. We've got all sorts of stuff. 87 Donruss, I see. 89 Flair baseball. We got a Topps Elf case, one of my favorite non-sports items. We've got 91 Leaf set, a bunch of rack box, 3-box case. Actually, those are 6-box and a 3-box case. Lots of miscellaneous Donruss stuff. We got a lot of non-sports in this section. That right there is one of my favorite items, which is an 87 Topps cello box case, of which I think I have only one cello box case in the entirety of my collection. And then over here we've got more rack box. These are all a lot of these here are 86 Topps rack box cases of 3 that I picked up for stupid cheap, like I don't know, I want to say like $150 or something. Maybe like 4 years ago, and those have done quite well. So there's kind of a mini tour of the stash. I'm going to take you guys back to the desk. Got a lot of Pokemon cards here as well, and talk you through. I'll have a different mic when I start recording again, but I want to show you that stuff first. So we'll jump into the second part of this video in a second. Okay, thanks for bearing with the terrible audio on that segment of the video. I decided just to kind of quickly record there with the phone audio, and it was pretty awful, as I discovered after listening to it, so I will probably not try that again. But the one of the main things I want to do with this video, other than take a little tour of some of the junk wax era sealed that I have, is to look at the pricing movements on these items, some of these items, and zoom in here for you, and get a sense of what the market has done in the past several years with regard to these junk wax era items. Because I think if you're totally unaware of what's happened to these kinds of items over the last several years, it would be very useful for you to know that in case any of these kinds of products appeal to you for your collecting or investing purposes. And maybe you have some of these, so you have kind of a rough sense, but you haven't really taken a closer look. But I've been a little bit kind of surprised, and this is something that I follow relatively closely, but I'm not always checking prices on stuff like this. So sometimes it's a year before I see what has happened with a particular product, and you know looking at a few products and trying to get a sort of more global sense of what the market's doing. For these junk wax era sealed sports cards is something I do even less frequently, so I'm taking the opportunity to do that with you all now so we can kind of learn together. So the first item I want to look at is the 86 Topps baseball wax box, which for the longest time is sort of, to me, kind of one of the staples of the junk wax era, in that it is truly junk wax in the sense that there's really no great cards in this set from sort of a raw card perspective. Every one of these sets in the junk wax era has cards in it that if they grade a PSA 10 can be quite valuable, but that's not really the measure by which I think you have to judge a set. The set is really the value of a set is determined, I think, by the value of the most expensive handful of cards in it. And in this case, again, ignoring that there are some oddities with grading a lot of cards in these sets because of pop charts and population control by PSA. Notwithstanding that, the value of the most valuable cards in the set is like $1 or $2 maybe. And that's not true of most modern sets that have, serial number cards, autograph cards, or even just key rookie cards in a relatively common, variety like a refractor. And those cards can sell for, $100, $200, $300, or many thousands of dollars if we're talking about the autographed or serial number cards. This stuff does not have things like that in it. So it's really sort of the, collectability of the sealed product as, kind of a novelty or display item. And it's the potential for pulling cards out of here that could grade well, that drive the price. And it's more the former, I think, than people, really understand or appreciate. There just is a lot of people who appreciate, the beauty and the increasing over time rarity of some of these sealed products from the 80s and 90s. This 86 Topps wax box is a perfect example because I think it's just such a cool looking box. These bright blue and yellow colors really pop on the shelf. If you were, alive and or collecting during the time this product was out, I feel like just the design of this thing, as much as it reflects the overall general product design of Topps with their sports card products during the 80s overall, it really, has a lot of sentimental value to people like me, who would have seen this stuff on store shelves as kids way back, 30, 40 years ago. And so, that translates into desirability in the marketplace, and people want to pick these up if they don't have them. And a lot of people, once they pick something like this up, they become collectors of junk wax era sealed products because, they do really tickle that nostalgia, bone in the body, and, lead to people wanting to acquire more of these and a variety of products from this era. So for me, the 86 Topps wax box is really, it's actually the first sports card product I ever bought in a store when I was, I don't know how, I was like, 9 or 10 years old when this stuff was out. Saw it in the local, 5 and dime store or the convenience store. Picked some packs up for 35 cents with allowance money or whatever I had at the time. And, for that reason alone, it's always going to be a special box to me. But what is interesting about this box is that, everybody who collected during the late 80s, early 90s remembers this really being almost a staple of the overproduction of the, the junk wax era. It was it was one-upped only by the set that came out after it, 87 Topps, which we'll actually look at next. in terms of overproduction and undervaluing by the market, once this sort of boom of the late 80s fizzled out, and we had to decide what we were going to do collectively as a hobby with all these items that got printed to excess during a time of great hype and great exuberance in the sports card market. So the charts I'm going to show you only go back about 5 years or so. This one goes back to 2020. Oh wow, there's an odd sale in here from 2017, which is funny because that was well before this platform existed, so that's some sort of data anomaly. But I think October 2021 is actually the date this goes back to. And as you'll see back then, this was an $80 box. And it was not hard to get, I think, for that price. I actually remember in about 2019 when I was, sort of really getting back into the hobby again and seeing stuff like this at card shows. I think these were really like $30 or $40 boxes if you could find them in person at card shows. Online, I suspect they were selling for, a bit more, but I think this $80 price is actually a little bit inflated. And again, I don't know what this alleged 2017 sale is, but the average price it lists is $35, and I think that's not completely crazy for pre-2021 pricing on this box. I think it was a $50 box back in 2019, maybe a little bit less if you struck a deal somewhere. But suffice to say, it was a pretty low rent box going back 5, 6, 7 years ago, and $85 even was high, I think, for what I remember seeing these at back in 2019. But since that time, I mean, you look at the consistency with which this chart has moved up over time, going from 80 to 90, and then low hundreds, and then to mid hundreds, and then, to today's time frame where we see an average sale price of over $200, and I think that's roughly accurate. These price charts, this is from Market Movers, and the data that goes in here for sealed products is a little bit wonky because it doesn't really distinguish between like a BBCE sealed box and a raw box, and so the average is kind of an average of a lot of different product types, but the general trends I think are accurate. And if we look at the average sales price over time, this is now a $200 box in current times, where it was 5 years ago an $80 box. So we're looking at over 100% growth on an item that I think for many, many years was seen as a complete piece of garbage. Before 2017, I'm sure you could pick these boxes up for $20 all day long, and people would be happy to sell them to you for that price. So this is really a box that's gone over the last 5 years from a position of, being really looked down upon and seeing as just absolute kind of space waster to a situation where it's over $200 a box, and these things are, I think, actually quite desirable. More and more collectors are, adding these magical little rectangles of unopened goodness to their collection and trying to hang on to them for the long term. So, that's led to a very consistent growth over the last 5 years in this box. And, I think 86 Topps Baseball has done quite a bit better than a lot of other products from, the junk wax era of the late 80s, even though it was so overproduced. Just because I think for a lot of people it has that sentimental value that really drives a lot of the price in this kind of era of product. So let's look at the 87 Topps, because this sort of demonstrates my point, which the growth on this has been over that same period of time a little bit more muted, but this was produced probably 2x or 3x more than the 86 Topps wax box, and for many years this was like a $10, $12, $13 box that people just absolutely really did not want. And even though the sentimental value of this is very high, so many collectors remember these wood grain borders on these cards and just opening mountains of this stuff when they were kids, as do I. And yet the overproduction of it, it was really the peak of overproduction, 87, 88, 89, I think, for a lot of card sets, especially baseball. So, that has kept pricing on this quite low for a very long time. But as the 86 Topps wax box broke that kind of $150 box barrier and now is going even beyond that, I sort of said, well, geez, I can see a world in which the 87 Topps wax box, does actually quite well. Maybe never as good as the 86 Topps wax box, but I could see it trending roughly in the same way, slowly going up, maybe not as fast, but, as consistently going up as 86 Topps wax box. And sure enough, here we are. This box 4 or 5 years ago was, a $30 box, $25 box. I'm sure you would see sales back, in 2020, 2021. And it's funny because this chart, because it sort of starts, at least in terms of like reliable data, it really starts in 2022. What you don't have on here is what happened during the COVID boom, when a lot of this stuff was like super, super jacked up and inflated. And it's probably a good thing because if you have that data in there, I think it really sort of throws off the trend and makes it all look a little bit suspicious. Whereas if you start, after that, which I think is kind of what you have to do to really see, the reality of what the market thinks of these products, notwithstanding, the bubble of the I was about to say .com, but the bubble of the COVID era that I think impacted, junk wax sealed era stuff more than it did a lot of other things. So if we weed that data out, I think we get a much better sense of what things have actually done in the past 5-6 years, since after just after the COVID era bubble crashed. So $30 is about what this was at back in July of 2022, which is just about 4 years ago. And again, as with the 86 Topps wax box, this thing just consistently has gone up to $40, then $50, and now it's sitting. These boxes are pretty consistently selling for $75. Unsealed, unauthenticated by BBCE. And I imagine if we looked at the BBCE boxes alone, we would see prices, closer to $80, $90 for one of these boxes. Never mind the from a sealed case boxes, which of course always have a premium over either the BBCE authenticated boxes or the raw boxes. So again, just a very consistent, nice, consistent chart, showing, these sort of double-digit 50-60% growth from the beginning, where it was at about $30 or $40. It's a really just kind of a nice, clean, reasonable, unscary, type of chart that we see here with this product and with all of the products that we're going to look at today. So if the idea of having something like this on your shelf is appealing for nostalgia or sentimental, value, you like the look of these cards, and you just want to have something that is more likely than not going to continue to, grow a little bit each year in value, that, is going to be more growth you'll see than you'll see in like the average stock market portfolio. These junk wax era products, I think, are a really neat pickup. And as you saw from the beginning of the video, I have picked up, my fair share of them in the form of sealed cases, a lot of which I've had the boxes inside, authenticated and wrapped as from a sealed case. So I have sort of the pinnacle version of the product in those FASC boxes that, I certainly recommend if that's in the price range for what you want to do with a particular sealed product. All right, the last item that I want to look at is 1989 Fleer Baseball. Now, this one is kind of interesting because it does have a couple of, fairly marquee cards that have value, even if they're not graded, as PSA 10s. And that is, in particular, the potential error and, more rare variations of the correction of the Billy Ripken F-Face card that was, a phenomenon since this product came out in 1989. Some of the boxes of these, have the error card, which as a raw card is probably $40 or $50 at this point. And there's also a Ken Griffey Jr. rookie card in here. He's a Hall of Famer. That's probably a $5 to $10 card raw. And so there are some, nice cards in this set. For that reason, it's always done quite well, I think, compared to other products from the era and other products even from 1989 that have the Ken Griffey Jr. rookie card, but don't have that, that error Billy Ripken card, which is, a sort of standout in junk era cards in that it's, relatively rare and therefore commands a high price. Now, the price gains you see here are all off their negative numbers because they're comparing to this wacky one-off sale from March of 2022, which was probably like a sealed, an authenticated box from a case that had the error cards in it. So that will always command a premium. So you have to ignore these, these negative numbers showing negative growth, and realize that the average price actually was, really about $50 a box about 4 years ago when this chart effectively begins. So if we look at $40 as starting price, we see this chart looks actually closer to the 86 Topps wax box in how it's grown, and especially recently, basically since like middle of last year, 2025, this thing has gone up quite consistently at a much higher pace than most other things from the junk wax era, and it seems to be peaking right now. Although, again, this is one sale, showing an average sale of 154. So again, that could be a BPCE wrapped box, could be an FASC box, could be a error box. So we don't want to take too much for that. I think the trend line is more important here. I think the averages here, where we've got 21 sales in June of 2026 for an average price of 121, is much more useful data. But, I do think that the thing has started to accelerate in its price growth, as we can see by the, increasing rise or angle of the chart here in the last year or so. So again, this box is another one you could have picked up, 6-7 years ago for $10 or $15 a box, and now it sits at an average price of probably $120 to $150 for a non-error box that's not even sealed. You'll see these prices, and I'll actually take you over to eBay here in 1 second. I have to. Sorry about that. Got my recording interrupted, but yeah, there's a Randy Johnson in some of these early boxes that can be, or lead to very high prices on FASC boxes from those early runs. But that's an outlier. We'll just say that. That's actually one of the more valuable forms of box you can get out of this thing, or out of this set. This is a much more common box. This is just a regular BBCE wrapped, so it's not from a sealed case. It therefore doesn't have an error code on it. It may or may not, contain errors, but more likely than not, it's a non-error box. So this is, just about $170 shipped for that form of box. This one does have a case code. It's probably not early enough to have errors in it, but it's an FASC box, so that's almost, $190 for that kind of box. Here's a slightly earlier code box. This is the code I'm referring to, and basically the lower the number is, the more early in the print run the item came, and therefore you can figure out which code number, like what the highest code number or what the highest code number you can have and still get errors is. So you can look that up on the internet and see whether or not a box is going to have errors in it if you know the code that's on the case that it came from. And again, there's no guarantee that the box that you're buying came from a particular case with a particular code unless you're buying an FASC box. So and this is just a loose box, not authenticated, kind of beat up, quite honestly. Actually, there's a couple extra packs in there, so maybe that's not a great example. But here's somebody purporting to sell, I think, an error box at $200, totally unauthenticated, kind of risky there in my view. What I want to do is find actually the price for just a totally unauthenticated, unknown, origination, case code origination box, and see what that sells for. And that's basically what you got here, where it's $130 for a box because that's pretty much like the cheapest form of this product is that kind of box. So at $130, here's another one, $135 plus shipping, so that's like $150 for that one, and $122 shipped. This one's very cheap, but it's beat up, quite beat up. So I mean, these boxes are consistently selling in the sort of lowest possible form for $130 to $150, and that's a very high price compared to what this thing was doing not that long ago. And I think you'll continue to see steady, not crazy, but steady, very good gains in these kinds of products over the next several years. And eventually, I think this stuff is going to get dried up so much that we might see some spikes in prices. So I don't know. There's just a very brief check-in on junk wax era stuff. I love junk wax era. I love sealed stuff from the 80s. I will have a lot of content on this channel looking at specific sets and specific price movements on these kinds of sets. So if you enjoy that, stay tuned. There's going to be more coming on this channel. All right, we'll see you all next time. Thanks, bye.